And we're back to talk about the trade that has sent the basketball world into a frenzy. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's freaking out. We have touched upon the possibility in many a podcast prior to this and all the implications it has for the league. But now that it's happened, it everyone's super excited to see what it's going to look like. And that would be the James Harden 4-team blockbuster deal. Harden goes to the Brooklyn Nets, where he wanted to go all along. The Rockets receive Victor Oladipo, Dante Exum, Rodion Caruks, and 8 first-round picks, 4 of which are pick swaps. Then the Indiana Pacers receive Karis LeVert and a second-round pick, and the Cleveland Cavaliers receive Jarrett Allen and Taurean Prince. Wow, Max, what did you say? What did you think when you first saw this come through the pipeline?
It took me a while to wrap my head around it. I think I really did not see this trade happening based on what the Rockets were asking for. So accepting that it had actually happened was hard enough. And then suddenly when Oladipo and the Pacers got involved, I just got pretty lost. And then, yeah, I mean, my mind's been reverberating on this, and I don't even know where to start picking out what thoughts. Yeah, I think frenzy's the right word. It's not a very, it's hard to say exactly what's going through my head. And just the whole thing is like, wow, this is wow.
Yeah. Okay, I can attempt to start dissecting it.
All right.
Let's go kind of just prior to the trade, where we had the comments of a DeMarcus Cousins acting mature, which that in itself should have lit off the warning signs that something was going to happen. But you have G League players who are on the Houston Rockets and DeMarcus Cousins and John Wall coming out and saying that James Harden had given up on the team and was not trying. And sure, he could put up 25, but you're missing the defensive end when he's just completely taking a break and not competing at all defensively. And you can tell he's out of shape. He's been eating and he's not doing the cardio, obviously, and it was almost his way of trying to force the team to get rid of him by slowly devaluing himself. And I think Houston looked at all that was happening and said, okay, we can't wait any longer. This situation is going to destroy our team's culture. And so we need to move him. And they started sifting through offers, most notably with Brooklyn and the Philadelphia 76ers. And I had been adamant that I thought it was going to be a Ben Simmons, James Harden centric trade. And that Philly was going to have the asset that Houston wanted more so than anything else. But I imagine Philly was there and they tried to ask for too much at the time from Houston and weren't willing to give up the right additional things that Houston wanted. And so Houston said, okay, no, screw you guys. We're going to go take the other offer that I guess offers us more draft capital, which they had lost in some of their previous trades, most notably the Chris Paul trade and then trading for Russell Westbrook. And so they wanted to replenish some of their draft stores rather than just getting Ben Simmons and then, I don't know, Matisse Thybulle, because that's just 2 players. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it begins. I think the Rockets got something, but I don't know if Oladipo is enough to prove to your fan base that you ever have won that trade. But uh, yeah, that's how I saw it. And then for the Brooklyn Nets, they get the guy that they were not sure that I guess they wanted. Obviously, they traded for him, but I don't know. What do you think about the Brooklyn Nets perspective?
I mean, the Mad Lads did it again, eh? They threw away their future in order to win now and have a big three. If at first you don't succeed, try again. This is probably the main thing mine and everyone's mind has been reverberating on. What is this Nets team gonna look like now? We thought we had a sense of their identity on opening night. And I mean, the Dinwiddie injury, I think, was huge, just in the sense that it ruined the Levert coming off the bench and playing like a starter part of the depth of that team. And obviously, the Kyrie saga goes on, and that is a part of this reverberation. But now the team identity is very different, especially with Allen and Prince gone. This is now like an ISO superstar team with that's going to be lacking depth, lacking center, but I mean, we can say it's the best offense in the league, like no holds barred now. So, I mean, what do you expect from this team?
Yeah, it's what James Harden wanted. So you imagine that once he arrives in Brooklyn, he's going to start playing himself back into shape. I don't know if the New York City nightlife is going to be conducive to that, but he will most doubtably, at the very least, he will be more motivated, because this is the best chance he is ever going to have of getting that title that people are going to hold against him for the rest of his life if he doesn't get. And he has the best possible teammate, singular, in Kevin Durant to provide him with the opportunity to do that. They're going to rerun uh, back to 2012, but this time they're much older and I guess much wiser. I don't know about that, but I think the trade is slightly hedging against the possibility that Kyrie opts out of the season, because we don't know where he's going, and uh, it also gives them not this just this year, but 2 more years of this big three for them to figure it out and hopefully not self implode. Uh, there's so many different ways to look at this. Who's going to have the ball during the game? I imagine the offense will run through James to start, and then he'll have him dishing to Kyrie and KD. But the great thing about Harden way back was that he was so effective off the ball, especially in Houston, catching the ball coming around, pin down screens and attacking the basket and finding open guys. And he was a great sixth man, and he's become so accustomed to everything revolving around him in that Houston solar system that will he be able to go back to that mixture of off ball and on ball scoring? Because everyone saw the 2K video on Twitter where they run down the court, James Harden dribbles for 10 seconds, passes it, Kevin Durant dribbles for 10 seconds, passes it, Kyrie dribbles for 10 seconds, and then just throws up a fadeaway shot that goes in. That'll be their offense. But yeah, it will take them quite a bit of time, I believe, to figure things out. They're going to score regardless of how they figure things out. I worry defensively because Jared Allen was way better on the defensive end than DeAndre Jordan. And Karis LeVert can play more passable defense than James Harden, and Taurean Prince can play more passable defense than now you've kind of got Joe Harris and Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot as your wing defenders. Kevin Durant's going to have to be an elite defender, and I don't know if you can rely on that with his Achilles injury, right? So there's just so many things to consider. A piece that we don't even really have time to talk about is how Kevin Durant was all about moving away from a super team to have his own team in Brooklyn, and now he's back to a big three. And like,
Oh, we've
yeah,
got time to talk about that.
okay, well, why don't you go for it? Because I'm starting
I
to
mean,
ramble.
no, but I guess I'll say, I thought of this when you were talking about holding it over Harden's head, and a big part of me is kind of rooting for this team to collapse to disincentivize such behavior, because if this works out the same way it worked out for the Warriors team, that is going to be such that's going to, like, people are going to look back on the last 10 years of the league and say, what did we see? We saw LeBron go to Miami and win rings with Bosch and Wade. Then we saw the Warriors. We saw the Spurs, and now we're seeing Brooklyn, not to mention Anthony Davis holding the Pelicans hostage to get to the Lakers. We're like, players are going to look at the last 10 years and say, wow, winning cups really matters. And the way you win cups is you disregard your current team, you make plans with other superstars, you pick a franchise, and you go to that franchise. So it's not I hate it from, I guess, that angle. And I think as fans, we're somewhat responsible for putting so much emphasis on cups. Like I really hope and wish players like Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, even if they never win a cup, can be talked about at the same level as guys like Kevin Durant and James Harden if they win a cup, because I think it's a difference in temperament more than ability.
Yeah.
And I'm frustrated. I'm
Yeah,
excited for this offense, but I just hate the idea of like knowing who's going to be in the finals for the next 3 years at this point in the season. So I'm so curious about the offense and what those 2 or 3 players look like together, and it should be amazing entertainment. But I kind of hope Kevin Durant gets his fair share and more grief over the super team stuff, and that is a mark on his legacy, because if it's not, then this behavior that I don't like is going to be greatly incentivized.
yeah, you're right. And it goes back to what we've been chatting about previously with the setting an example for the rest of the league. Who knows if Chris Paul moves on and Devin Booker decides, hey, I want to go play with D'Angelo Russell and Carl Anthony Towns, and hey, Zion wants to come join us too. Like, obviously, cap wise, I don't know if that's possible, but it just incentivizes these younger guys who watch these current stars and say, hey, why can't we just go do that too? And then you've ruined the parity of the league, and small market teams never really have the chance to succeed, and it makes it a less inviting business opportunity for any potential investors, and that means you're losing out on team success, leading to new market growth, and overall hurts the financial success of the league. And that's a bummer. I just don't know if the short-term gain of, wow, look at the Brooklyn Nets stars, outweighs the long-term effect uh, of this move.
You know, I do feel for Harden. I mean, he's been such a great player for so long. He had to contend against that Golden Knights team, and he gave it his best for years and years. And at least he showed up, right? Like, he wanted out, but I don't.
But did
I
he
need to
show
give.
up?
I need to give some. He showed up physically, and that is not everything. But if you're gonna rate it on a scale of maybe like what Kawhi did in Toronto is a 10, and I like I don't know who the one would be. I can't think of any no one's like no superstars have taken it to the point that like Iguodala took it when he went to the Timberwolves and was just like, nope, trade me. So a little to some credit is due that, okay, you stuck in this situation you didn't like for years, and you still showed up this season and played and put up 20-25 points. You subconsciously definitely half-assed it, but you gave it something of an effort consciously. I guess part of the problem is kind of franchise loyalty too, like in the sense that you feel bad enough for your franchise to give them some advance notice, like, hey guys, I'm not sticking around. If you want some value for me, you better trade me. I guess in Harden's case, with 2 years out still, it's a little different because who knows what kind of player he's going to look like in 2 years. He'll be what, like 33, 34. Man, we haven't even talked about Kyrie and gotten off the Nets yet. This is probably going to be the whole segment.
Yeah. I don't really. We touched on Kyrie previously.
Yeah.
I just want to say that James Harden had everything revolve around him in Houston for the last 7 years, 8 years, and they had success with some of their guys, and of course he's brought many great memories to Houston. But when you're a guy who uh, has the organization essentially wrapped around your finger and they're doing everything to satisfy you, and then you up and decide to just quit on them and do it in the way that he did, where he's basically not even trying anymore. He's getting into fights with teammates at practices, and he's acting like a guy who has won something when he has disappeared in the biggest moments. And I'll just kind of tie that into what he has now on the floor. Is historically James has been someone who disappears in those last quarters of games and has only really had a track record of playoff stinkers. He now has, of course, Kevin Durant, but also Kyrie, are two guys who, at one point or another, have a signature clutch fourth quarter playoff moment or moments. They do show up in those biggest moments, whereas Harden tends to shy away. So this is truly his best opportunity to make it to the finals. I'm loving my prediction even more now. And yeah, he finally has the guys who will show up in those late games in the playoffs when he decides not to.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we can wrap our Nets part of this segment up by just saying best of luck, Steve Nash.
Yeah.
Man, his head must just be spinning.
Yeah, it's one thing to have the Steve Kerr job where you step in and have to manage all those egos. But the thing is Steph and Clay are probably two of the best superstars to ever have in that situation, because they don't need the ball in their hands all the time, and they are so accommodating to the other superstars. So when Kevin Durant was there, Steph and Clay were willing to defer. Even though it was always going to be Steph's team, he was willing to defer and give KD everything that he wanted to have.
That's its own type of leadership, which is very commendable.
Exactly, but you're not going to get that in Brooklyn, pardon me. It's going to be Harden wanting his shots, Kevin Durant wanting his shots, and Kyrie wanting his shots, and poor Nash is going to have a lot of ego massaging to do, and he's going to have to use all of that great Canadian energy to make sure that they're all on the same team, pulling the same direction.
Oh, listen, guys, there. How about in the second game, we give Kyrie the clutch shot. In the third game, Kevin Durant gets it. In the fourth game, Kyrie gets it. In the fifth.
Aw, shucks.
Sorry there, Harden, but you're going to have to step up there a little before I can trust you. How about in the fourth quarter of some of these regular season games, you show me what you got, eh? I don't know.
All right, on that note, let's move on to the Houston Rockets side. I already talked a bit about what they got and how maybe it wasn't the best, but it was pretty good for the way that the situation was tumbling out of control for them. They flipped Karis LeVert to Indiana for Victor Oladipo, I guess because they believe he is the slightly better player. And at one point before his injury, Victor Oladipo, you could have considered as a top 20, 25 player in the NBA, and was on an upwards trajectory to be in that top 15 conversation. So it's a flyer on him. And then, yeah, you restock the draft shelves that you had depleted trying to satisfy Harden in previous years. And if you're Oklahoma City, you got to be happy because they have a couple of those Houston picks that are going to be kind of this year that are going to look a little bit better now. And then on Houston's side, they got picks all the way to 2027, and those big three are going to be gone by then. And it might turn into one of those situations. Like that's how the Celtics got Brown and Tatum, was because the Nets gave up so many picks in the past for KG and Paul Pierce and Darren Williams that they got the benefits way further into the future, and Houston's hoping that they can have that same sort of outcome.
Yeah, I'm actually very impressed that the Houston team managed to get this much for Harden. I I thought they were going to be the ones who had to compromise and take less, but 8 first round opportunities from a team that is like a coin toss on self-destruction. And like you said, even if they don't self-destruct, like with those guys, I mean, Kyrie's the youngest, but he's talked about retiring at like 30. Kevin Durant, James Harden, I mean, even if they decide to re-sign, you don't think they'll be at the level they're at for too much longer. So yeah, they've got a pretty great chance of getting like several top 10 picks to rebuild or retool their franchise. And then in the meanwhile, now they've kind of got the return from injury trio, eh? They got John Wall, Victor Oladipo, and DeMarcus Cousins, who I like. Part of the talk I heard was that the ownership is still above all looking to be like lucrative and profitable, and you need to win, you need to sell product to your fans to do that. So I'm kind of curious to see what direction they go, because having said that, I think Karis LeVert made more sense than Victor Oladipo, in that Oladipo is on the last year of his contract and he wants to win. So I are they going to blow it up and just go the OKC route? Like they could flip Wall and Oladipo to some championship hopeful teams and probably get a decent return, which if they're looking to go the rebuild route, which the 8 draft picks says they are, that would make sense. But if they're looking to stay competitive and give something to the fans, then I don't I don't know how they convince Oladipo to stay. So I'm wondering, I feel like they have to have a trade in mind going for Oladipo, because it really doesn't make that much sense to me otherwise, because he's certainly going to leave the team after this year. But in terms of like the most value they could get for Harden, I think they got it with those Brooklyn draft picks. I think that was the best for the future of the franchise, even if the team's not going to be as good right now as it would be with a Ben Simmons.
Yeah. I To talk more about their on-court, kind of wrap up the Rockets pieces. I actually think they're going to stay relatively similar in terms of performance because of course you lose this guaranteed offensive machine, but the benefit of losing that toxic component of your culture has great effects, and you saw it last night. Christian Wood is now the franchise cornerstone of this team. You have the 3 guys returning from injury, but Christian Wood is like shown to be a really, really talented player who they have on a great deal, and they actually may be looking to build around him. And last night, I know he was going up against LaMarcus Aldridge, who's not the greatest defender at this point in his career anymore. But Wood went off, and the Rockets, with only 9 guys, half of which being people we had never heard of before this season, beat the San Antonio Spurs. And you could just tell they had more life. Like John Wall wasn't playing, Oladipo's not there yet, and Christian Wood and a bunch of random like bench players beat the San Antonio Spurs because they had that life, that the rejuvenation of no longer having that toxic player in their midst, right?
I mean, when did the Raptors franchise put itself on the map? When they traded Rudy Gay and said tank for Wiggins. Like, I'm not making a toxicity comparison, but just sometimes you get a bit of a tumor, whether it's benign or malignant,
Mhm.
off, you lose that dead weight, and just team culture, team energy lets players shine more than you realize they had the potential to. And there's just a spark in the game. So that best case for Houston, like the team plays above expectations and the Nets tank, like they could absolutely come out the number one overall winners of this trade deal.
Yeah. But as it stands right now, I would put I guess I'd still give the Nets the win just because it's James Harden and he's the top like 40 player of all time. But another huge winner in this trade has got to be the Indiana Pacers. They,
Before you go, I need to clarify something I said. The
yeah,
number one winner of this trade deal are the Brooklyn strip clubs, but the
yeah,
number one NBA franchise winner. Okay,
yeah.
let's talk about the Pacers.
Okay. They, I think, very shrewd move on their part, saw what was going on, stepped in and said, here's our guy that no longer fits in with their team, right? This is a Brogdon and Sabonis led Indiana Pacers team. It's no longer Oladipo's team. And you could tell that he was not satisfied with his situation. And this way they get him out the door because he didn't want to be there. And they bring in a very comparable player in terms of production with Karis LeVert. He can be your starter, but he can also come off the bench and just absolutely torch the other team's bench unit. And so I think it's it's a solid move. They replace Oladipo with LeVert, who has more years left on his contract. So you have a little bit more runway to see how he fits in with your team. And yeah, you give up a guy who didn't really want to be there anyways. So it's a good piece of business by Indiana to insert themselves into this deal and help facilitate things.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah.
I think LeVert gets an opportunity that I don't see why he wouldn't have this, as like he gets on a title contention team where I kind of assumed he was going to start. I guess we'll see, but like he never would have had this opportunity in Brooklyn playing behind Kevin and Kyrie. He was always going to be the number 3 guy. Now he has the opportunity to at least like be on the same starting line or in the same position standing as Sabonis and Brogdon. And I think when you're that talented, you've got to at least have enough of an ego to want to be that guy and be in that place. Now he has the opportunity to do so. So I like this trade. Great for LeVert and the Pacers. Like you said, flipping Oladipo, I think makes a lot of sense for them. And yeah, that's definitely a win for them on this trade.
The last team who I think people were a little bit confused as to why they got involved in the trade, but I actually think they got some decent pieces out of it were the Cleveland Cavaliers. They received Jared Allen and Taurean Prince, both guys who can provide you with some great defensive oomph and are great guys you could have in a rotation. And what I think this means is they're not sold on Andre Drummond, especially with the number of shot attempts he's taking a game and how much they may have to pay him. But they have Andre Drummond, they have JaVale McGee, they have Larry Nance Jr. who can all play center, and now they got Jared Allen, so they're trying to collect all the centers. But it's silly right now, but I think this really shows that Cleveland is going to move one of those centers because I definitely think a contending team would love to trade for a JaVale McGee because he's been on those Lakers and Warriors teams and has just protected the rim and caught lobs and is a great guy to come off the bench for probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Um, so teams might be interested in him and teams might be interested in Larry Nance or even Andre Drummond. I'm less sold on him being ever on a championship contending team unless he takes a pay cut. But the Cavs like kind of jump in there and get assets for they send the Milwaukee first round pick that they had, which is going to be really low in the draft anyways. So yeah, it's just another team that kind of said, okay, we can help move these things along in the trade and fix some cap implications and help with some like player, like Houston would have had too many players on their roster. So they just helped out with that and managed to get some assets in return. Not much you can really say. One of those centers has to be on the move. Otherwise, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, create a artificial market shortage to drive up the value of their center assets, maybe.
It would work if centers like were actually valuable anymore.
Yeah, I mean, with Jared Allen, you have a potential long time, like similar age to Sexton, Garland, so that could be the face of this Cleveland team for the next 5-10 years if the wind blows their way. I I don't know about Drummond. If I think it's his contract's up this year,
I believe he took his player option. So yeah, that would be.
so some nice insurance for Cleveland that they'll still have a potential starting center if Drummond decides to leave, which I mean is also ironically much more likely now that they've added, but a trade would also, we'll see what happens with a trade in the works.
All right. We'll take a quick break because that was a lot of trade stuff to get through. And then we'll come back with just a couple quick storylines from the NBA from the past couple days.